Morning, Gamecock fans. Today is Wednesday, July 23rd, the year of our Lord 2025, and this is Coffee. Certainly appreciate all of you joining me here on this hump day as we are moving right along toward the start of Gamecock preseason camp, fall practice. John Whittle and I, John from thebigspur.com, we've sort of gone back and forth. I think I was the first one to sort of think about this when I was working in national college football, uh, recruiting media. I guess that was such a new thing. Sometimes people would refer to like recruiting cycles as years, and I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Uh, and I kind of started using cycle, and everybody else did too, because it wasn't a year; it was a over the course of 2 calendar years, and fall camp didn't make much sense to me because in most places, even, not in the South, there's nothing fall about preseason camp. And so I started using preseason, and John Whittle's a stickler for that now too, because it's not, doesn't take place in the fall. But I guess, somebody told me too, and this makes sense. Well, it's in preparation for the fall. And I'm like, well, you have spring practice though, clearly in the spring. So I don't know, but fall camp, preseason camp, some just use the pro term and say training camp now. That gets underway. For those that don't know, I'm sure you do. If you're listening to this, you probably know everything, probably know more than I do, to be honest. It's the reason they call it camp. And it used to be, if you've seen the Junction Boys, Bear Bryant at Texas A&M would take his team out to the middle of nowhere and beat them up and all that good stuff back in the day. Arizona State, and I don't know if Kenny Dillingham still does this or not. They actually have a place in northern Arizona that's an actual camp that they would take their school to. Back during the Todd Graham era, they kind of revitalized that. I don't remember the name of the camp, but it's in way out of the greater Phoenix area. Um, I believe in the northern part of the state. It's a little cooler there, obviously in the summertime in Arizona. But it used to be it was an actual camp. It used to be they had 2 a days. Now, what it basically means is before school starts. These guys during school when classes begin, they're going to class most of the day, and camp is designed to work on football all day, get ready. They don't really prep for the first team on their schedule until 10 days out or so. So they'll start looking at Virginia Tech kind of once school starts and getting the routine of things. It's more to decide who's going to be playing for the Gamecocks this year in preseason practice, and they have scrimmages and stuff like that. I'm all for instituting some sort of combined practice, scrimmage against another team, something like that in college football. I mean, heck, they've changed the rules with just about everything else. I think with the turnover on the rosters, it's highly unfair now to structure it the way you've structured it. It's the only sport on earth, I think, where you don't get a practice game against another opponent. I can't think of another one. So, I mean, that soccer game that was here at Williams-Brice Stadium last August, that was a warm-up game. That was like a preseason game or match, I guess was the proper term for soccer. I don't understand why the hell we don't do it in college football. It's amazing to me that this is the sport that brings in the most money, that funds all the other sports, that has by far the most attention, that's driven the bus as far as all the expansion and all that stuff. And regardless of how you feel about that, I have my opinions too. Why are we so restrictive with allowing coaches to prep for the season? It's the same concept with the Big Ten wanting a spring portal period, probably because they think it benefits them a little bit. I have no idea. But looks like they're probably, based on Tony Petitti's Big Ten meetings comments, they're probably going to one portal period in January now, which is good. So that helps. But I think there's a way you could structure it to give your team a look. I mean, even if it's 7-on-7, right? Even if you're like, okay, we're going to do basically a camp. We're going to have the linemen out there. It's kind of like the opening, which is a recruiting thing where all the top prospects get together out in Oregon in the summer. Yeah, what they do there, it's not full pads for linemen, it's helmets and shoulder pads, shells, I guess. And you hit a little bit, but it's just upper body, you're not full contact. And then the skill guys do 7-on-7s. You have a combined practice and get a look. It's not real football, but at least it's a look, and you can kind of evaluate some of your players to a certain extent against somebody other than yourself. Because coaches will tell you and will tell you, well, what does it mean if you have a scrimmage and the offense goes up and down the field? Well, does that mean the defense isn't very good? Does that mean you just have a great offense? Yeah, and once again, when the scrimmages start, what you want is for the defense to be ahead and the offense to catch up over the course of the 2.5, 3 scrimmages they do in the preseason. But it gets cranked up soon. I mean, 9, 10 days away. You got the Birdies with Beamer media event, I believe, on Monday. You have Media Day later in the week. I think it's the 31st of July. And then they get cranked up. John's got speaking of Whittle, he's got a countdown on the Big Spur every day, 10 days till camp or whatever. I think we're 10, 9, maybe 9 today is the number. So it's getting here, folks. And, heading in, everybody's got question marks. Every program in the country, no matter how many teams or players that they have returning, you've always got questions that need to be answered in the fall. Just regardless, Clemson, I use them as an example. They have a lot of players returning this year, a lot of significant players, a lot of good ones. The Tigers have high expectations for a reason this year. Well, they do have a open running back spot. Is it going to be their true freshman Gideon Davidson? It's going to be somebody else, So there's questions everywhere. South Carolina's got a lot of questions because of the players they lost. And, you look around the projected 2 deep. There's not a ton of guys that you go, yeah, okay, that's a starter. They're replacing 3 offensive linemen, their top tight end. Receiver, there's players coming back that played a lot last year, but you also got an influx of newcomers that will compete for those spots. Quarterback set. Backup quarterback is not. We talked about that yesterday on the show, and look for a poll on that today, the poll du jour on thebigspur.com. And we'll talk about the results on the show later today. But we kind of dove into it yesterday, so we won't do it again. But I think that's an interesting question that nobody's talked about because that's very unsettled. On defense, the whole front 7 outside of Dylan Stewart's gone. And then you have the secondary. So there are questions everywhere. Secondary missing Nick Emanware and O'Donnell Fortune. There are questions everywhere. Some questions are better than others. I think if you're not, as far as concerned, not concerned, and the question everybody wants answered, we consider talk it to death, and we do. But the bottom line is, how good are they going to be? That's what all you want to know. Are they going to be good? Are they going to be able to help Carolina win football games this fall? That's the quintessential question that we all want to answer. And it's really hard to answer in college football because you just don't know. Every year there's a surprise. I think that, there's a lot of concern about the interior defensive line. I wouldn't be surprised if that's not a concern. And maybe another spot that we're not talking about as much as a concern pops up as one when the games start to be played. It's just one of those things. There's so many, as far as performance in a game, there's the mental side of it. There's what other teams have and the matchups and the coaching. I mean, there's all kinds of things that go into game performance. But we do the best we can to try to talk it through, right? That's what the off season's for. That's why we all love it. And some questions, I guess the question marks are better than others. And what I mean by that is like the cornerback position at South Carolina. The question here is not necessarily Do they have high expectations? Do they have talented players? Do they have experienced players back there? The question is kind of how are you going to fit these guys in and get them on the field? That's a great question to have. That's a positive question because you've heard the old iron sharpens iron thing. You've heard Beamer. That was Muschamp that said that. And then Beamer says a core tenet of the program is competition. And competition makes everybody better because everybody wants to play. And so you're going to get out there and try. Not that kids don't try and practice. I mean, when they have a starting job, wrapped up. Dylan Stewart didn't miss a single practice last year. He probably could have been one if his toe was a little sore, could have sat, but he didn't. And that is a testament to him. The great ones don't do that. And I'm talking great, not just merely good, but great. That's the difference sometimes between good and great is that drive in this sport. But you look at the cornerback position and, it's interesting. Sort of like, and I call it the carousel or the positive feedback loop. Or the positive feedback carousel. A feedback loop sometimes is negative, so this is more positive. So we'll call it a feedback carousel. And it is. It's like watching a carousel go around and round with the defensive tackles this year because, that carousel's going around. So you may see like a black horse and then make a unicorn and then, that thing that doesn't go up and down the carriage or whatever. And you see those at different times, and it revolves constantly. If you sit there and watch a carousel, merry-go-round, whatever you want to call it, you're going to look at everything over and over. And that's kind of how the feedback was with D tackles. You have Michael Goodwine, Nick Barrett, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, and at different points, spring and off season, you hear, man, this guy's really going to be good. So you have that. Well, you do have the same thing about the corners. And unlike the D tackles, where, Monkel Goodwine and Nick Barrett have been here, but Brownlow Dindy's new, and you've got newcomers behind them, the corners have been here. Last year it was a kind of a three-man rotation with Fortune, and of course he's gone, but Vakari Swain and Judge Collier played a ton of snaps. And so they're back. So then out of the transfer portal, and when they got him, I said, this is a guy that's probably just too good not to take. Brandon Cisse from over in Sumter, who was at NC State. The Gamecocks beat Florida and Ole Miss on him. And there's a reason those schools were like, man, we'd really like to have you because he's really good. And there's been a ton of great feedback with him, Swain, and Collier. Some think Collier could be all SEC this year. And I think Judge, to his credit, between a true freshman season where he just sort of played a little, and then last year when he was a starter, he got a lot better. He's always been pretty good. He's always kind of been better than what his ranking out of high school said. He's a Rock Hill defensive back, for crying out loud. Those guys don't miss most of the time. And so you sort of look at it, and it's a group that, in my opinion, thinking back through the years, Carolina's had great corners. I'll just start listing them, the last 25 years. Andre Goodman, Sheldon Brown, Dante Robinson, Jonathan Joseph, Fred Bennett, Captain Munnerlin, Stephon Gilmore, J.C. Horn, Keyshawn Nixon is in the NFL, although he was sort of quiet when he was at Carolina. Rashad Fenton, Chris Lamons was in the NFL for a while. Cam Smith, Darius Rush, Marcellus Dial, and then O'Donnell Fortune. That's a long list, and that's not safeties. That's not counting like Nick Emanware and Co Simpson back in the day, and guys like Antonio Allen, who actually did play corner a little bit in the NFL. Devontae Holloman, who, if he hadn't gotten hurt, was on his way to Izzy McQuamu, who's with the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, I think back through the years, I probably even left somebody out, if I'm being honest. Stoney Woodson got drafted. He was a corner. A majority of these guys are from South Carolina, too. I mean, a bunch of them. So, Rock Hill DBs. How many are from Rock Hill? With Louisville, where Sheldon Brown's, I guess that would be kind of that area. I know Jonathan Joseph was from Rock Hill. Fred Bennett was from Manning. Gilmore, Rock Hill. Down the line. Yeah, a couple from Rock Hill. But you go back in time, there's Derek Ross. There's Jeff Burris. They went out of state, but Rock Hill defensive backs. Carolina's got another one coming in, Jazavian Currents from South Point. But I think back to these teams that had these corners, and there have been times, man, you've had dynamic duos. Don't get me wrong. I thought last year's corner combination with the three was pretty strong, particularly when you start to consider the physicality they all played with. And that at times has been an issue through the years. South Carolina's been good at pass coverage out there, but you run wide. Yeah, and I know everybody's going to start yelling about the Missouri game, but that was different. I'm talking throw a bubble screen and the blocking receiver obliterates your corner, or he tries to arm tackle and the guy breaks a tackle and goes up the sideline for 30 yards. That kind of thing. That happened not so often last year. Some teams tried it, especially early, and it didn't work out too well for them. And that's because that group last year, very physical in the secondary. Kind of like Brown and Goodman were back in the day, if I'm being quite frank about it. And Stephon Gilmore was that way as well. You had a lot of other guys too through the years. But I think through the years, and they've had situations where you've had a duo. Like I said, like Brown and Goodman were probably one of the better corner duos to play at Carolina. Gilmore had Jimmy Legree on the other side of him. Captain Munnerlyn had Carlos Thomas and Fred Bennett, kind of all in that same time frame. Jonathan Joseph had Fred Bennett, and then had Co Simpson at safety. You've had situations at corner, Smith and Rush, Cam Smith and Darius Rush, pretty good duo looking back on it. When you're talking about corner duos through the years, I think that's definitely one if you really kind of break it all down. I can't remember a time where Carolina had four. You know, because the Holtz team with Brown and Goodman, 2000 especially, the backups in the secondary were all true freshmen. You had guys like Rasheem Monroe, a young freshman, Dante Robinson back there, DeAndre Island. That's another one that got drafted. He was kind of a corner safety from Mississippi back in the Holtz era, a defensive back at South Carolina. But you had young players that year. I remember it distinctly with Antoine Neesmith back there at safety as well, converted running back. But you looked at that group, and boy, it was lights out. That was a great defense, but there wasn't much depth behind them. Kevin House was a backup defensive back. Kevin got a pretty bad, caught some criticism back in the day in the Outback Bowl after the 2001 season because I believe it was Craig Krenzel from Ohio State just started lighting up the secondary. Then he threw an errant pass at the end. Sheldon Brown intercepted it. The Gamecocks kicked the winning field goal. That was Holtz's second Outback Bowl win. But I don't remember the depth, and you had to stay injury free. I mean, gosh, '06, that season. Thank God for Captain Munnerlyn because Captain came in as a true freshman and kind of held down the fort, and Carlos Thomas, Fred, and then Fred Bennett, Stoney Woodson. I mean, I guess that was a little bit deep. Seems to me Fred Bennett had an injury or something. But it was very thin because I remember going into that year, I was like, man, the secondary, the corners, goodness gracious. So it hadn't always been a deep group, but this year, the question is, how do you get these guys on the field? You probably rotate like you did last year, but you have, I thought Vakari Swain last season really came into his own. The 2023 redshirt year, I thought because they had a lot of bumps and bruises at receiver, and it was basically Xavier Legette and everybody else, maybe a little Trey Knox and Josh Simon at tight end. I thought, gosh, that guy's redshirting. He was a fantastic receiver in high school at Carrollton. Why not just throw him over there? Well, as my dumb self goes, I'm not a coach. It's not that easy. And there's greater things coming for the player because he sat there and redshirted and learned from Torian Gray. And then last season, he was fantastic as a redshirt freshman. And then missed, had the academic situation or whatever, missed the spring, but is back in good graces and is ready to roll. Didn't hit the transfer portal like the Colorado Homer that runs a transfer portal, Colorado Homer Twitter account in disguise. Tweeted out he's never going anywhere. And that's a testament because, you run into situations like that are kind of off the field. I think that the first instinct would be to get out, leave, go start anew, start afresh. And Vicari didn't, to his credit. And he could have gone a number of places. I mean, I mentioned the Colorado Homer that tweeted out he was going to Colorado. Colorado finished second. They coveted the kid. Deion Sanders loved that guy and thought he was outstanding. And he's a guy, I don't know this, but they may have seen his receiver and corner film and said, well, we can use him like Travis Hunter. Who knows? But, Vicari's back. Judge Collier, who I mentioned, he's a camp eval from Rock Hill, bigger kid. He's like 200 pounds now. Very physical player. Can jump through the roof fast enough. Just gets better and better. And my understanding is, based on feedback I've gotten, he's ready to take another step this season. And then you have Cisse, who everybody missed on except NC State. He goes to NC State, plays a lot as a true freshman, special teams, and then locks down the corner job last year. And NC State struggled a lot. They turned it around and ended up getting back to a bowl game. I think they beat North Carolina again. Gosh, that series is completely flipped. If you look at the overall record, North Carolina has got, I think they have a better overall record against State than Clemson has against Carolina, or Texas has against A&M. If you're talking about semi-lopsided football, in-state football rivalries, but Dave Dorn, that's the one thing he's done is beaten North Carolina. He's the Tommy Bowden of NC State. How about that? But Cisse individually played well. I mean, State probably regrets some of their defensive performances last season, especially early on, but that guy was good. And like I said, there's a reason, and the word elite has come up several times in my conversations about him. And of course, they got him out of the transfer portal. And then here's a guy nobody's talking about, but I thought he looked good in the spring game. He had a pick. He picked Lenore Sellers, Miles Norwood, who they also got from the transfer portal sort of before Cisse popped up on the radar. Miles been to a lot of different schools. Iowa State kind of found him. He's from St. Louis. So Iowa State sort of found him. Obviously, Matt Campbell and his group can find football players and bring them to Ames, Iowa, because they've had a ton of success. Very consistent program out there at Iowa State, which has not been the best job or easiest job. Matt Campbell's a great coach, but you have to be able to go find players and evaluate and say, okay, well, this guy may not be getting a bunch of attention, but he's a ball player, right? And so then that that didn't really work out, and so he went elsewhere. I think junior college, and then Miles Norwood ended up at Ball State, where he played really well last year and had a lot of offers. The Gamecocks in Kentucky were the final two, and the Gamecocks ended up getting him. And he's kind of, I don't want to say definitely the fourth corner, or any of these guys are definite starters or whatever, but he's kind of that next guy for now. And he's an older player, an experienced player, and I think he's quite good. I think he's quite good. I'm not sure there will be like an enormous drop off when he comes in the game. And we're talking about, the fourth guy or the one of four guys. Jalua Solomon's still there. I don't know. He played nickel last year and redshirted. I think he's still kind of a corner in some instances. And then I think that he may get a look at safety too. Jalewis is a very versatile player, and obviously he's talented, and I know they'd like to get him on the field. And then DeMarcus Leach is a true freshman from Abbeville that's playing some corner, or that's playing corner. He was projected as a safety, but he's kind of, and then Chris Hatfield, 6'4", 210, newcomer from Georgia, that enrolled in the summer. They didn't come in spring. I don't know if he's a corner or safety right now, but they said when they recruited him he could be a corner, and he could be. And he's another big tall dude that's out there. And they asked Shane Beamer about him, I believe, SEC Media Days. I think one of the local Georgia stations asked about him, see how he's doing. He said he's shown he belongs. Very good athleticism, has gotten in there and assimilated quite well. So those are the guys. I'm probably leaving somebody out, but the top four, that's the interesting good question I was talking about, is how are these guys going to kind of rotate or play? I think I think right now, and this is basically based on Swain missing spring practice. Not, I mean, he's a veteran. It's his third year. I don't know how. I mean, and obviously South Carolina's got the same defensive system because Torian Gray and Clayton White have been here the whole time Beamer's been here. They're going into their fifth seasons at South Carolina, so I don't know if there's much of a learning curve for him. But you know, sometimes when you're out, other guys step up and they earn it. And so let's just say it like this: I think Vakari Swain will have to earn a starting job in the preseason. I don't think just because he's the coming back and not a newcomer that he's going to get to start, because I think Brandon Cisse has that job right now heading out of spring and into preseason camp. And I just continue to hear really good things about that guy. Big surprise, right? We're talking about these top four. Two of the four under recruited players from South Carolina. Judge Collier did not have, maybe App State, Virginia Tech could have offered him when he committed to the Gamecocks. And then Cisse, of course, had the NC State offer. And then everybody kind of realized that, we didn't really see that coming. And so now he's back as part of the Gamecocks program. But it's been that way, since Sheldon Brown and those guys. I mean, Sheldon Brown was not a highly recruited guy. He was a running back in high school. So, for every Fred Bennett and Stephon Gilmore and Cam Smith from the state, there's a Darius Rush, Marcellus Dial, O'Donnell Fortune that is Judge Collier, Brandon Cisse that has emerged. And that's good. That's good for the state of South Carolina. I think that wide receivers and defensive backs in South Carolina. And then when you have defensive linemen, they're very low bust rate with the D linemen out of the state of South Carolina. Those are kind of the strong spots. Different states, some are everything states, some are everything but offensive line and quarterback states like Florida. And some are, offensive line states like Ohio. It just kind of depends. But good old South Carolina, wide receivers, DBs, D linemen all day long. And then we've had a nice run of offensive linemen in this state as well the last 2 or 3 years, and we'll see if that continues. But it's I know Sequel Patterson reclassified, but he was one of the top 2 players in the state along with Josh Dobson. It's no surprise it's a corner and then a receiver, and then there's a bunch of defensive linemen too in 2027. So no surprise there. But so how are they going to play him? I think, because now some may say, well, why don't you just play Brandon Cisse at nickel? Because Brandon Cisse has taken reps at nickel and can get in there and play nickel. Well, because you take Jelon Kilgore off the field if you do that. Well, why don't you move Jelon Kilgore back to safety? Well, they tried that in 2023 and didn't work real well. Now, he was a true freshman, and it may have had more to do with DQ Smith and Nicky Manware playing nickel and maybe not being ideal or not having the best day at that spot. Moving him to nickel kind of solidified everything. And he's comfortable there. And he kind of, that's an important position in this defense. So he kind of just mans it. So I don't know that maybe you do that, maybe you don't. I think that you could have some different packages. You could do a straight rotation. Yeah, I don't know, and I'm not ruling out at some point if it's the best group, and it could talent wise and like player wise, like putting all your best players out there. That's probably the best group with Jelon Kilgore, DQ Smith at safety, and then Cisse at nickel and Swain and Collier. I just don't. I don't know necessarily that that's the plan, and I'll tell you why. Because if you move Kilgore back, let's say he's just not as good back there as he is at nickel, closer to the line of scrimmage, and you weaken that position because Peyton Williams, not the football player Kilgore is. Nobody's sitting there, at least for right now, and going, "I'll take Peyton Williams over John Kilgore." But as a safety, Peyton may be the better option, or David Bushi, or Kelvin Hunter back there. I think it's going to be Peyton Williams, but so it may just be experience and all that. It's kind of the same concept as is Big Tree Babalade going to be the starting guard? Well, how good is he compared to the other guards? Or is he just much better at tackle? I don't know. Those are other good questions, but so it's kind of a conundrum. I don't really have a strong opinion either way. I just know that I have trust that all these guys can play, and I think depth is good. I think having good corners and defensive backs and a lot of them certainly helps your special teams. Vakari Swain's one. I don't know if it's in the cards or not, but as a returner, I think he's got potential. I mean, they were working Jelon Kilgore at punt returner as well. He did that a little bit last year. So who knows? Who knows what'll happen? More on Brandon Cisse. He's much faster than I think people thought coming out of high school. He's a legit 4.4 guy and big and physical. He was a special teams demon his first year at NC State. Those guys have to be physical. So a lot to be excited about there. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. But I will say, I think this is the deepest Carolina's been at corner that I can remember. Maybe looking back, like the year Dante Robinson was a true freshman and a backup. Yeah, you look there and go, well, there's four NFL guys in your top four, future NFL guys. Yeah, that's a good group, but a couple were true freshmen. I know the 2010, 2011 secondary had a lot of great players. 2011 especially. But they were more just like across the board. And then after that, you just don't know. So I don't know. You guys tell me, is this on paper the deepest Carolina's been at corner? Not safety. Not safety. Can't count DJ Swearinger. He was a safety at the time. Can't count Antonio Allen when he was here. Can't count Chris Culliver when he was here. But I don't know as far as just depth goes, because you're talking about this top four, really good, all older guys. And then after that, a good young player in Jalewis Solomon potentially. DeMarcus Leach from Abbeville. I think in a couple of years that guy's going to be really good. We'll see how it all works out. Chris Hatfield's back there. You got a lot of corners. Torian Gray has a lot to work with, and if you kind of compare it to when they got here, where there was, they took a former walk on from Burns High School safety Jalen Foster and made him an All-American. That was pretty impressive. They just got a lot more to work with back there, so it's only going to get better and better and better. And I'll continue to maintain, I believe that South Carolina will be able to defend the pass on passing downs. The issue, and I don't know that it's going to even be an issue. It's just like I said, it's a question we don't know. Is going to be stopping the run. I don't know that last year's defense was the very best defense at stopping the run all the time. But you don't want to set up a bunch of second and threes, especially second and three, third and short, especially against this bunch. coming up from Blacksburg because Drones, the quarterback, he can run out of there and make things happen on that down and distance, and it's dangerous. Because at that point the defense kind of has to pick their poison. What are we going to try to stop? That's the whole key to defense. What do we need to stop? And then all the talent in the secondary that you've got, you know, as far as pass coverage goes, is out the window. I mean, because they're either going to throw a short pass or to surprise you with a pass when you creep up to stop the run, kind of thing. Football stuff. So you got to be careful with that. But and look, I'm not saying they're not going to be able to stop the run. I'm not going to say that. I'm not sitting here saying they're not going to be good at it. I mean, I think I've been clear about the linebackers and the interior of the defensive line. Say what you want. They're much bigger than the group last year. I mean, they're going to be 330, 315, 315 across the board. Troy Pikes is around 290, kind of the same size as TJ Sanders, but they're going to be bigger. Linebackers will definitely be bigger. Fred Johnson, 6'3", 244, like we talked about yesterday. Right there in the middle, Sean Murphy and Justin O, 6'3", 231. So that's a big front. So yeah, you hope they can stop the run because I think, with Dylan Stewart and the pass rushers they have, if it gets to passing downs, Carolina's defense can be salty. Just because you have guys back in the secondary, and all that. I think Nick Eamon-Warre is also another factor when it comes to stopping the run that people may not be talking about because he was really, really good at safety in that. So can Peyton Williams, DQ Smith, whoever's back there, be good like Nick. I don't know if you could be as good like Nick, but could be, an eraser against the run game. So anyway, that's one of the good questions. The corners, probably one of the deepest groups I've seen at South Carolina in my 20 plus years of following the program, covering the program closely, in my lifetime of, being very aware. Let's just say that from the time I was, 10, 11 years old, following the South Carolina Gamecocks and all that good stuff. Maybe there's a group back there somewhere. If I am, leave a comment, let me know. I like to be accurate. If I'm not accurate the first time, I like to be accurate down the road. Hey, dumb butt, you forgot this group. Because I wrote some guys down for memory and just kind of talked about it, but back in the past. But this group, if it's not, if it doesn't end up being the deepest at corner, it's one of them. And corner's a premium position. There aren't a lot of good ones in college football anymore. I was talking to Bill King about that because, Tennessee, they're hoping and praying that their guy they got from Group of Five last year that starred at corner is healthy this year because he's a big factor. But I think everybody's playing receiver, right? These days. All right, stay tuned. Inside the Gamecocks, the morning show, we have Darren Usher, or they have Darren Usher on, the director of player personnel for the South Carolina Gamecocks, talk recruiting. Always a great conversation with him. Also, Rob Williams from SEC Sunday Night will pop in the show with Phil, and I will follow more VHS dating tapes. And also some other topics. Probably going to get into this thing Colin Cowherd said, one of the most elitist things I've ever heard about how the Big Ten is just going to, because of the population centers and money, going to pass the SEC. He made a snide comment about, well, a lot of car dealerships down there, but not a lot else. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't hate Colin Cowherd, but I took exception to that. So we'll talk about that. Talk about the poll du jour, the backup quarterback thing, and lots of other stuff. The late night Gamecock show is tonight following Sports Talk on the Chief Sports app. You'll have Sports Talk from 6 to 8. And then the late night Gamecock Matt Anderson, along with Alex Jones of Smorgasbord fame and thebigspur.com. We'll hop in right at 8, the late night Gamecock show. Check it out, Chief Sports South Carolina YouTube page. Please like, subscribe, share. Still, only 45% of our audience has hit the subscribe button. So do me a solid, do that for us. And we'll be back with Chief Sports South Carolina with the morning show at 10. Once again, Darren Usher. This is JC Shurburtt signing off from Coffee. Holla at you soon.